The air in the workshop, usually filled with the scent of sawdust and welding flux, was thick with the cloying sweetness of cheap champagne. My brother, Kevin, held a bottle aloft, spraying a cheap fizz over the concrete floor my late husband Mark had so carefully poured and polished himself. My mother and father were clapping, their faces glowing with a kind of greedy pride I knew all too well. They were celebrating. They were toasting the sale of Mark's life's work, this sanctuary he had built with his bare hands, to the very son they had always favored over me. To family, and to keeping Mark's legacy in the right hands, my father declared, raising his glass to Kevin. The right hands, of course, were his. They had finally done it. They had taken the last piece of my husband from me. I watched them from the shadow of the massive roll-up door, the engine of my lawyer's car still humming softly behind me. Their faces were masks of triumph, convinced they had outsmarted the grieving, helpless widow. They didn't realize the contract they had signed was based on a fraudulent document, and the celebration they were having was, in fact, the final piece of evidence I needed to take back everything they had stolen. And then some. You might be asking why a family would so brazenly rob their own daughter just weeks after she lost her husband. To understand their boldness, you have to understand the lie they built their world upon, that I was nothing without them, and that everything my husband had achieved was simply a resource for them to claim. They were about to learn, in the most public and humiliating way possible, just how wrong they were. Mark was a meticulous man. He loved me. He saw my family for what they were, and he had planned for this exact betrayal. He knew they would come for his legacy the moment he was gone. And he left me one final gift, one final tool to protect myself. A will so ironclad, so precise, it was about to bring their entire world crashing down around them. I took a deep breath, straightened the lapels on my jacket, and stepped out of the shadows and into the light, my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, following a half-step behind me. The laughter died in their throats. Their smiles froze. Their faces went pale. They knew something was wrong. They just had no idea how wrong. My mother was the first to recover, forcing a brittle, high-pitched laugh. "Lila, darling, you're here. We were just toasting to Mark's memory. Kevin is going to do such wonderful things with this place, just as your husband would have wanted." She started to walk toward me, her arms open for an embrace, but Mr. Harrison took a subtle step forward, and she froze. His presence was a silent, unmovable wall. My father cleared his throat, his eyes flicking from me to the expensive-looking briefcase in my lawyer's hand. "Lila, what is the meaning of this? Who is this man? This is a private family matter." "It stopped being a family matter the moment you forged a document and used it to fraudulently transfer ownership of my property," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the tears they were so used to seeing. It didn't tremble. It didn't waver. It was the voice of a woman they had never met. To understand their shock, you have to go back to the week Mark died. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hushed sympathies. My family descended upon my home not as a source of comfort, but as a flock of vultures. My mother bustled around the kitchen, ostensibly making tea, but really opening drawers and cupboards, her eyes taking inventory. My father sat me down at the dining room table, patting my hand while talking about the crushing burden of managing an estate, and how I, in my delicate state, couldn't possibly be expected to handle it. Kevin was the worst. He walked through Mark's workshop, a place he'd barely stepped foot in when my husband was alive, touching the tools and machinery with a possessive air. "Big responsibility, this place," he'd said to me, shaking his head. "Good thing you have Dad and me to help you figure it all out." Their sympathy was a performance. Their grief was a lie. They saw my husband's sudden death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. They saw my pain not as something to soothe, but as a weakness to exploit. A week after we buried Mark, my father called a family meeting. He sat me down on my own sofa and produced a single folded document from his coat pocket. He looked at me with a pained expression, the very picture of a reluctant patriarch doing his solemn duty. "We found this in Mark's desk," he said, his voice heavy with false emotion. "It's his will. He made me the executor, Lila. He wanted me to take care of everything for you." My father slid the paper across the coffee table. It was a single page, typed, with a signature at the bottom that, in my haze of grief, looked enough like Mark's to quell the immediate alarm bells in my head. I remember my hand trembling as I picked it up. The legalese was dense, confusing, but the core points were brutally simple. My father, Daniel, was named the sole executor. I would continue to live in our house and receive a generous living stipend from the business profits, a sum to be determined by the executor. The workshop, however, along with all its assets, machinery, and client contracts, was to be liquidated. The final venomous clause was tucked near the end. My brother Kevin was to be given the first right of refusal to purchase the entire business for a fair family price, a price that would be set, of course, by my father. It was a heist written on a piece of paper. They were going to give me an allowance from my own husband's earnings while they handed his life's work to my brother for pennies on the dollar. "I don't understand," I whispered, looking from the paper to my father's face. "Mark, he would never sell the workshop. It was his life. He wanted you to be taken care of, sweetheart," my mother interrupted, her voice syrupy and condescending. "He knew you couldn't possibly run a business like this. All those clients, the finances. It's a man's world, honey. He did this to protect you, to take the burden off your shoulders." My brother, who had been sitting silently on the armchair like a king awaiting his coronation, finally spoke. "It makes sense, Lila. This way it stays in the family. I'll do right by him. I'll make the business even bigger." Every word was a carefully crafted tool designed to make me feel small, incompetent, and ungrateful. They weren't just stealing from me. They were trying to rewrite my husband's character into someone who thought I was as useless as they did. They were using my grief as a smokescreen, banking on the fact that I was too broken to fight back, too exhausted to see the glaring inconsistencies, too steeped in sorrow to question their motives. In that moment, sitting in my own living room surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, I had never felt more alone. I was too weak to argue, so I just nodded, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling over. Seeing them, they exchanged small, triumphant smiles. They thought my tears were a sign of surrender. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological abuse. My father and Kevin immediately seized control of the workshop. The locks were changed, and I was not given a key. "For insurance purposes," my father explained, not even trying to make the lie convincing. Kevin began parading around the business, introducing himself to clients as the new visionary taking over. He treated Mark's loyal employees, men who had been with him for over a decade, with utter disdain, calling their craftsmanship slow and outdated. He was a child playing dress-up in a dead man's clothes, and my parents were his adoring audience. Every Friday, my mother would visit me and hand me a thin white envelope containing a few $100s in cash. "Here's your stipend for the week, dear," she'd say with a patronizing smile. "See, your father and I are making sure you're well taken care of." They were treating me like an irresponsible teenager, doling out an allowance from my own money, reinforcing the narrative that I was helpless. All my life, it had been this way. Kevin got the new car for his 16th birthday. I was told to get a job and save up for the bus pass. He was praised for getting a C in algebra. I was interrogated when I got an A- instead of an A. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble. And in my family's twisted world, that made me the designated loser, the one who was expected to sacrifice her own needs for the sake of their golden boy. The fog of my grief began to lift, replaced by the cold, clear light of rage. The final straw came about a month after the funeral. I went to the workshop, intending to retrieve a framed photo of Mark and me that he kept on his office desk. I used the spare key Mark had given me years ago, a key my family didn't know existed. I let myself in quietly and heard my father and Kevin laughing in the office. I crept closer to the door, which was slightly ajar. Kevin was holding up one of Mark's most intricate designs, a blueprint for a custom spiral staircase that had won him an industry award. "Can you believe how much time he wasted on this garbage?" Kevin scoffed, tossing the blueprint on the desk. "We'll use cheaper materials, simplify the design. We can churn these out at a quarter of the cost." My father clapped him on the shoulder. "That's my boy, smart, no room for sentiment in business." They weren't just stealing his business, they were mocking his very soul. In that moment, something inside me hardened into steel. The tears were gone for good. They had underestimated the grieving widow. Now they were going to meet the protector of Mark's legacy. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the cruel words of my father and brother echoing in my mind. The image of them tossing aside Mark's beautiful, intricate blueprint was burned into my memory. They weren't just taking a business. They were trying to erase the man I loved. My grief, which had been a paralyzing fog, finally crystallized into a single, sharp point of purpose. Mark was the most meticulous man I had ever known. He planned everything, from a complex furniture commission to a weekend road trip. He knew my family. He saw how they treated me, the subtle dismissals, the patronizing tones. He would not have left me unprotected. He would have anticipated their greed. I started to search, not frantically, but methodically, the way Mark would have. I thought about the places that were sacred to us, the secret spots only we knew. I bypassed his office desk, the first place my father would have ransacked. I ignored the obvious file cabinets. Instead, my eyes landed on a heavy toolbox in the corner of our garage. It wasn't one of his work toolboxes. This one was special. It was the first one he'd ever owned, a beat-up metal case from his apprenticeship days. He kept it locked, not because it held valuable tools, but because, he'd once told me with a wink, it held his original blueprints for success. The key was always in the same place, on a small magnetic hook hidden behind the license plate of his old, half-restored pickup truck that sat in the garage. My fingers closed around the cold metal key, a jolt of connection to him running through me. I opened the toolbox. Inside, beneath a tray of old, worn-out hand tools, was a large, waterproof document folio. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled it out and unzipped it. There, nestled inside, was a thick envelope with my name written on the front in his familiar, strong handwriting. It wasn't just a will. This one was professionally bound with the seal of a prestigious law firm in the city, Collins, Harrison, and Finch. And on top of the document was a handwritten letter. It began with the words, "My dearest Lila, if you are reading this, it means I was right about your family. Do not let them bully you. You are the strongest person I know. Inside this envelope is your shield and your sword. Use it. What we built was ours, and ours alone." I read Mark's letter a dozen times, the paper growing soft under my fingers. His words were a posthumous embrace, a final gift of strength that extinguished the last flicker of doubt within me. He believed in me. That was all that mattered. Then, with hands that no longer trembled, I opened the official will. It was exactly as I knew it would be. Clear, simple, and absolute. I, Lila, was his sole heir and the sole executrix of his estate. Everything, the house, the savings, the investment accounts, and the business, free and clear, was mine. But it was the second clause that made me draw a sharp breath. It read, "I intentionally make no provision in this will for my father-in-law Daniel, my mother-in-law Mary, or my brother-in-law Kevin. It has been my primary observation during my marriage that they consistently and willfully underestimate my wife's capabilities and character. I do not trust them to act in her best interest, and therefore, They are to have no claim, contact, or influence over my estate in any capacity. It was a final, loving act of protection, a legal shield forged by his foresight. The next morning, I called the law firm named on the document. Collins, Harrison, and Finch. I asked for Mr. Harrison, the man whose signature appeared as a witness on the will. I was put through immediately. My husband, Mark, told me to call you if anything ever happened to him, I said, my voice steady. I believe you have the original copy of his will on file. I'm afraid my family is trying to probate a forgery. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then a deep, serious voice replied, Mrs. Quain, last name. Mark was not just a client. He was a friend. He worried this might happen. Can you be in my office at 2 o'clock? When I met Mr. Harrison, he listened to my story with quiet, focused intensity. I gave him the single-page fake will my father had produced. He barely glanced at it. An obvious forgery, he said, disgust in his voice. The signature is a poor imitation, and it's not properly witnessed or notarized. They're relying on your grief to prevent you from looking too closely. He then laid out the strategy. They want to steal the workshop, he said, his eyes sharp. So we will let them. Let your father play executor. Let your brother pay the family price. Let them sign the fraudulent deed of sale. Let them celebrate their victory. Every step they take is another felony charge we can document. They are building their own prison. We will give them all the rope they need, and when the time is right, we will pull it. The plan was cold, calculated, and perfect. All I had to do was play the part of the defeated widow a little while longer. And so, I waited. For 2 weeks, I played the role of the shattered widow perfectly. I ignored their calls. I let their condescending text messages go unanswered. I gave them the silence and space they needed to walk right into the trap. The day of the sale, my father sent me a text message that dripped with false piety. It's done. Kevin is the new owner. The workshop is in good hands. Mark would be so proud. That was my cue. I forwarded the message to Mr. Harrison, and we drove to the workshop. Now, standing in the silence that had followed my arrival, my father puffed out his chest, his face turning a blotchy red. I am the executor of this estate, he boomed, pointing a finger at Mr. Harrison. And I am telling you to leave my daughter's property. Mr. Harrison gave a thin, humorless smile. That's where you are mistaken on 2 counts, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. First, you are not the executor. And second, this is not your daughter's property. It is my client's property. My client, Mrs. Lila, last name, the sole executrix and sole beneficiary of her late husband's estate. He placed his leather briefcase on a nearby workbench, the clicks of the latches echoing in the cavernous room. This is ridiculous, my mother shrieked, her voice cracking. Lila, tell him about the will Mark left, the one your father found. The one you forged, you mean? I asked, my voice calm. From his briefcase, Mr. Harrison produced the real will. This, he announced, holding up the professionally bound document, is the last will and testament of Mark, last name, filed and recorded with the county clerk's office 1 year ago. I will read the pertinent clauses. His voice was resonant and clear as he read the clause naming me as sole executrix. He then read the clause bequeathing the entire estate to me. He paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final crushing blow. And Clause C. I intentionally make no provision in this will for my father-in-law, Daniel, my mother-in-law, Mary, or my brother-in-law, Kevin. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over their horrified faces. The document you used to authorize this sale is a criminal forgery. The deed of sale your son is holding is void. And the 3 of you have just actively participated in a conspiracy to commit felony fraud. The color drained from my father's face. He stumbled back a step, looking at me as if for the first time. The mask of the confident patriarch had crumbled, revealing the weak, frightened man beneath. My mother began to sob, not tears of grief, but the wrenching, theatrical tears of a manipulator who has lost all control. "Lila, no," she wailed, reaching a hand out to me. "We're your family. We love you. We were just trying to make things easier for you." "Easier?" I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "You thought making me a tenant in my own life would be easier? You thought stealing my husband's legacy and selling it to the son you always loved more would be easier? You didn't do this for me. You did this because you've spent your entire lives believing I was a failure, and you couldn't stand the fact that I had built a happy, successful life without you." Kevin predictably thought only of himself. "My money," he yelled, his voice a petulant whine. "I transferred the down payment to Dad this morning. That was my life savings." Mr. Harrison answered him without even turning his head. "Then I suggest you ask your father to return your life savings, as the asset he pretended to sell you never belonged to him. The transaction was a sham from the very beginning." He looked at my father, whose eyes were darting toward the door as if contemplating escape. "Don't even think about it, Daniel. The wire transfer from your son's account to yours is a matter of bank record. It is now Exhibit A in a fraud case." He then placed a thin folder on the workbench. "Here are your options. Option A. The three of you sign this document. It is a full confession to the attempted fraud, a relinquishment of all claims against the estate of Mark, last name, and an agreement to never contact my client again. The money Kevin transferred must be returned to him by noon tomorrow. If you sign this, Mrs. Last Name, we'll consider keeping this a civil matter." He paused, letting the weight of the unspoken alternative settle in the room. "Option B is that you refuse to sign. In which case, my first call tomorrow morning will be to the district attorney's office to file criminal charges. Forgery, conspiracy, fraud. You'd be facing years in prison. You have 5 minutes to decide."
I walked back to my desk and sat down, the picture of calm control. "Destroy you? Number, you did that to yourselves. I'm just collecting on a debt. It's simple business. The same kind of cold, hard business Sarah practiced when she liquidated our marriage. The same kind of business you endorsed when you told her she was doing the right thing." I looked at my father. "You taught me a valuable lesson that day in your living room, Dad. You taught me that love and family are conditional. That respect is something you earn through success. Well, consider this my graduation. I learned the lesson." I swiveled my chair to face my computer, pulling up a document. "The liquidation of Mark's company will proceed at 9 a.m. on Monday. My team will take possession of all company assets. As for the collateral," I looked at my parents, "you will have 30 days to vacate the house before the bank, which I now hold the note for, takes possession. I'm not throwing you on the street, I'm just closing a bad investment." I didn't need to see them escorted out. I didn't need to watch their final, pathetic pleas. Their power over me was gone. The hold they had on my self-worth was shattered. I had spent 10 years thinking I needed to get revenge on them. But as I sat there in the silence of my office, I realized the revenge was never really about them. It was about me. It was about proving that the boy they threw away could build a world they couldn't even imagine. It was about exercising their voices from my head. The news trickled back to me over the following months. Mark declared bankruptcy and now works as a paralegal, his name stripped from the letterhead. My parents sold what they had left and moved into a small rented apartment, living a life of quiet shame. Sarah's second divorce was quick, leaving her with nothing. Last I heard, she was working as a hostess in a restaurant, her youth and beauty fading under the harsh fluorescent lights. I took no joy in their ruin, only a quiet, profound sense of peace. My life was my own. My empire was built not on their approval, but on their rejection. I was free.